question two from Mr. Mooney. We'll pretend it's January 10th, 2009. Governor Schwarzenegger has just proposed budget cuts that include another $3 billion in cuts to public schools in California. What are the implications for AUSD, and how would you respond? And if you'd like me to repeat the question, I will. $3 billion in budget cuts proposed in January.
All right. So in general, the ramifications mean another $4 million in cuts to Alameda schools. And we're going to be, and frankly, I would submit that the number that the governor will come out on January 10th, 2009 will be higher than that. All we did was kick down the can down the street, or whatever the phrase being used with the current budget. And certainly I'm interested to see what it really comes out for. So the implications are great. Certainly, number one, I'll be advocating with my new board members that we vigorously defend Measure H. Measure H should theoretically cover most of that, assuming that it's $1 to $2 million in hits this year, and if it's $3 billion, equaling $3 million for Alameda next year, that'll equal the Measure H approximately $4 million. And as we've sort of talked about before, really creating a master plan so that we actually know and talk in advance. I'm not actually really interested in going back through the lists that the superintendents have done over the last 7 years, because you know what, they kind of all come back as the same list, a little bit rehashed. So that's what I would be doing, is to say, okay, we need to defend Measure H. If Measure H, for some reason, gets held up in the courts, that we're not allowed to spend that money, then we're going to obviously have to take immediate action to prevent any state takeover by the schools. We can't not act. But my first belief is that Measure H will be upheld, and we'll use that money.
And then to follow up, some in the audience may have already heard that the legislature is considering calling a special session soon, because the budget, as bad as it was, may not be done yet. And that's even before January. But in the event that there are more cuts, mid-year cuts, or large cuts for next year, at the end of your answer, you mentioned the phrase state takeover, which I don't know if the audience would regard that as a bad term, but if you can explain how you see that possibility, what we could do specifically to avoid that, and if you have time to comment also on how that might affect education practices in Alameda. So the prospects of the state takeover specifically, and its impact on AUSD if it were to come to pass.
So the state takeover of schools comes to pass when the school district cannot tell the county, who's an agent of the state, that we have enough funds to not only make this year's budget, but ongoing year's budget. You have to show at least for 3 years going out. And there's various levels of takeover that is possible. And certainly my previous community was Emeryville, and actually after we moved here to Alameda and I was off that school board, Emeryville's schools got taken over. And I actually was involved in sort of the rediscussion of the business community about how we would support the schools. But it's ugly. The state, if the state has to loan the district money, they take total control away from the school board. They fire the superintendent, and they put their own superintendent called a trustee in place. And that person has pretty much unilateral ability to make decisions. And while they might hold a public meeting, they are not answerable to anybody except for the state superintendent of schools. So I would think it would be devastating, and we would need to do everything we could to make sure that the state does not take us over, which might mean making some very tough decisions to make cuts so we can keep local control, and if we have to go back to the voters or whatever to make sure that we are funding our schools without the drastic cuts that might be coming down, we need to at least have that discussion and give them the opportunity to continue to support our schools as they have in the past 7 years. What's another part of your follow-up?
I asked about the impact on local education.
Yeah, so local education, all of the things that many people say are fluff, are extras, sports and things like that, the state administrators or trustees are very easy to take a red pen and cross them off. My opinion, seeing what my sons and daughters go through, they're not fluff and they're needed.
And You have 1 minute, Mr. Forbes.
There are two issues with state funding: A, the amount, and B, the timing of finding out how much. You mentioned a potential cut of $3 billion statewide, which would approximately translate to $3 million for Alameda in next year's budget. We still don't know exactly how much we're getting for this current year. As a school board member, we will have a presentation on this a week from now as to how much we're getting for this current year, which has been going on already for a while. So I thought for state funding over the last few years, 3 out of the last 4 years had to go through the painful process of budget cuts. It's ugly, it's not fun, and that's why we do need local support.
Can you repeat the question again?
The initial question was, it's January 10th, 2009. Governor Schwarzenegger's proposed budget includes another $3 billion in cuts to California public schools. What are the implications of that for Alameda Unified, and how would you respond if the governor were to propose significant budget cuts in a few months?
This could remind me of on the board of the Alameda Food Bank, and we were going into the reserve, and we knew that in another year we wouldn't be able to keep the food bank open. And so we formed the advisory committee making up of businesses and other nonprofits as well as in the county. And two things: we look for long-term solution for ongoing needs. And the second one is we were looking for alternative sources of funding, and then to be able to communicate that need to the public.
Yes, Spencer?
Okay, one thing I think we would want to do is advocate that since we're a low-wealth district, that the $3 million not be across the board, that not every district share that cut the same. And I would think that we would want to join with other low-wealth districts and try again to appeal to the governor and the other legislators throughout the state that to recognize how much less we receive from the as compared to the other districts. And I think we would really have to step up and do our advocating, our rallying and whatnot, and hopefully get some recognition for that, because $3 million from us is much more painful than $3 million from a district that receives $10,000 per child as compared to us at the $6,000 per child. So there really is a different starting point. And then, of course, if in fact we're unsuccessful on that, then we do have to take ownership of our district and figure out how do we live within our means, which is something that people don't necessarily like, but this parcel tax, it is in litigation. I think we have to recognize that. Thanks.